Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and our topic for episode 46 is developing a personal leadership philosophy. And why is this important? What are your guiding principles that drive that personal leadership philosophy? We will get into this topic and so much more with our guest, Dr. Andrew Campbell. He's the author of 3 books. Listen to this background. He is currently the director of the International Peace and Leadership Institute. During his career as a senior military officer, Dr. Campbell worked for the Department of Defense, specializing in global experiences in strategic planning and execution, organizational crisis leadership, leading organizations in uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments, and national strategies for learning and leadership development for senior leaders. And Dr. Campbell did a TEDx talk back in January of this year. You will hear all about this too. The topic was navigating toxic organizations, healing through forgiveness. You're in the right place. This conversation begins now with Dr. Andrew Campbell. Let's dive into your TEDx that came out in January. Tell us about that process. I think people that do that are very courageous, putting together a script, finding the courage to go out and do that. Tell us about how that went, the backstage pass, and then obviously the topic in which you spoke about.
I did that on a dare. A friend of mine, a friend of mine said, I think you need to kind of take a look at this and do a TEDx on this. And I was like, a TEDx? What's a TEDx? And I looked at it and I was like, okay, I really didn't anticipate to get it, to get accepted. But what I did was I sent and I looked and I applied at a couple places. I applied at the Oshkosh, and what I wrote it on was navigating toxic organizational environments, healing through forgiveness. That was the topic of it. And the reason why is because I had written a article on forgiveness and reconciliation as organizational leadership competency. I have presented it at the International Leadership Association, at the International Institute for Restorative Justice. I presented it in Malaysia and in Thailand. So I said, okay. So I went on ahead and just threw it out there. And I had two places that actually accepted. One is Oshkosh, okay, at that TEDx. And then I was also accepted for the Omaha one here in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was really interesting because the one in Omaha was supposed to be on the 4th of that month, but they changed it to the 19th, which was the same weekend as the Oshkosh. So I had to choose one. And I chose the one in Oshkosh because I really believed that that one was one that I was really supposed to go to. And I understood why now as I did it. I wrote it with some help from somebody that specializes in uh, uh, writing TEDx talks. I took part of what I had taken in the uh, in the article, and then I added to it because I brought something different to this one, and that was one thing that they wanted to ask. When I was interviewed, they asked, "Well, you've given this all over the world. What are you going to bring to the table that's different this time?" And I said, "The thing I'm going to bring this time is what is the difference between cognitive forgiveness and emotional forgiveness, and how to repair a toxic work environment." And that was the whole focus of the talk, was how do you recover from a toxic work environment as an individual in a organization that's toxic. 73 million Americans work in a toxic organizational culture according to the International Bullying Institute. That's a study in 2021. MIT did a study. The reason why we have the great resignation is not because of working in a remote environment, not because of job compensation, but the reason why is two things. One is the toxic work culture, and two is the unethical leadership behavior that they were witnessing.
So you set up the talk, you write the talk, you have somebody help you with the script. You submit the script, they say, this is great. Why were you
So
chosen? What about this topic is so rich? Why did they say this is something that needs to be uncovered?
because it is for one, it's nobody ever talks about it.
Got it.
Nobody ever talks about why, toxic organizational cultures, it's so prevalent within the United States, and a lot of it is because of leadership. And I am my thing was I was more I they liked the part that has never been talked about, the difference between cognitive forgiveness and emotional forgiveness, and how that impacts going from one division in a organization to another organization, or leaving it from one company to another company, and all those feelings, and how I was going to address it. And that's what they liked.
So, cognitive and emotional. So, the difference is in your logical brain, you can say, I forgive this individual. I can rationalize why this happened, why that happened, why I'm in this certain situation. And I could logically say, I'm going to get past this and I'm going to move on. I want to sustain my career. I want to have joy in my life. I want to continue to pay my rent, mortgage, etc. So you cognitively say, I'm going to put this in a good place. Emotionally, that's more difficult, is what I'm reading into and hearing your analysis here. And emotionally, that has repercussions that take on lives of their own and last longer. And as you said, permeate into other areas of the business. Do I have this right? You will not offend me if I do not.
Kind of. Because what because cognitive forgiveness is where you rationally and logically decide to forgive, okay, and an offender that who has done you wrong. And unfortunately, we decide to forgive, and you may think that you have forgiven the offender, but those negative feelings are still there. Okay, those negative tags. And so it's it's like forgiveness. Okay, forgiveness is giving up the right to hurt the perpetrator for hurting you. That's the cognitive. We're just saying, oh, just you just need to forgive. You just need to just get over it and deal with it. Just logically go. Okay?
Mhm.
But the problem is that those feelings, which you can do in your head, logically you can do in your head, okay, and we get that, from church, family, friends, that gives us those messages. But it's a superficial, hollow type forgiveness. It's really not forgiveness at all. In fact, research shows that letting go, moving on, and turning the issue over to, say, God, and waiting for divine retribution, does not bring a state of forgiveness. And Worthington actually talks about that. But forgiveness itself is is actually healing those emotional tags, which is like hurt, anger, resentment, seeking revenge, retribution, um, something that really harms you. According to Klemensko in 2012, he says that forgiveness is an important leadership competency that's not discussed. And it's because it's a way for individuals to repair workplace relationships and overcome debilitating thoughts and emotions that you bring to your next job or you bring to that situation. Does that make any sense?
It
And
does completely. However, it's not just the leaders, right? I mean, this is something that is widespread.
it's the rank and file. It could be leaders. It could be, it's at every level within the organization. In fact, I'm working with a company right now that the president of the company is the toxic leader.
Hold on, I got to ask because the audience is going to want to know this. Does the person know they're toxic? You
They
said you're
don't.
working.
They
They do
don't.
not know.
They don't. They feel like it's more of other people's perception of of what he's like. I'm not. I mean, I'm trying to get things done. I get things done, and if people don't like how I do it, then they can always go someplace else.
So your work is with the combination of the leader, the said leader, and the, as you call them, the rank and file, the
Right.
staff. So you're trying to bridge the gap so they have a mutual understanding from which to go forward. Foundational elements, how to communicate with one another, how to listen better, and you're trying to eradicate the toxicity of that company.
The thing is that It's important to have a forgiveness culture. And that's what the paper that I wrote one was to identify. I did a analysis of what a unforgiveness culture is and a forgiveness culture is. And unforgiveness is when you have that culture, it causes a high turnover, mistrust, fault finding, organizational conflict. Whereas if you have a forgiveness culture in a organization, it facilitates psychological safety, trust, and respect within the organization. The problem is that it's more of, are you being a boss or are you being a leader? And there's a difference.
Dr. Campbell, before you go into that, that is an incredibly rich topic. A boss and a leader, or a manager and a leader. We make those words synonymous, as you just were saying. They're not. Can we go back to the company you're working with? What is your methodology of educating this person and bridging the gap so you are doing your job as the consultant to bring this company to a good place?
The thing that I'm the thing that I'm doing right now to help bridge that is trying to help the president understand the difference between a boss and a leader, helping the staff understand that how you communicate and how you have those difficult conversations takes courage, and then also helping them to heal some of those, that resentment and the hurt that's gone on. One of the things is that they were trying to do before I came in is that they were trying to do a strategic plan. The president was going to use the strategic plan as a way of saying, this is what you need to do, this is why we're doing it, and blah blah blah. But then the rank and file was going to use it as a way to try to get the leader, the president, to change. And and people don't change. People don't mind change, they just don't like being changed. One of the things is that we as leaders need to understand, or we as people actually need to understand that our character impacts how we approach things. That we need to be always in the midst of, how can we do things better, how can our relate better. And so I'm helping him right now develop a leadership philosophy of, and what is his guiding principles. Because what that does is that when you have a vision statement for yourself and you have a mission of your own life, and as you do, and what your leadership philosophy is, it helps you identify what those gaps are between who you are and where you want to be.
I love this. Dr. Campbell, this is incredible. This is what I do with my consulting practice as well. It's trying to define who you are when you wake up in the morning and you continue on to your daily life in your profession. It can't be a switch. You can't cut someone off in traffic or be rude to the barista at the coffee shop. But however, when you get into the workplace, then turn on something that you are different. It has to be, like you're saying, a philosophy and character that is continued throughout your day. Let's go back to what you said, the difference between a boss and a leader, or a manager and a leader. How would you distinguish between the two? You referenced the president who had a strategic plan. Here's what we're going to do: X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's why we're doing it. Go do it. There's more to it than that. You and I both know that. But could you please explain?
Yeah. A boss is more of a person that is more of a command and control directive. As a boss, you're more focused on the productivity than you are about the relationship. Being a leader is more of a relationship. To be a leader, you have to be more of a servant, and more of, not where it's not into yourself, but more of, this is what I'm giving to my people. I'm taking care of them. Let me give you an example. And General Petraeus used to, I love to quote him, and I love to, because I used to work for him. I love to do this. He will tell you, what happens at home carries over to your work. What happens at work carries over, because we're not neurologically designed that way. We're not. We can't separate things. Okay, what impacts one is going to impact the other. And when if you cannot lead your family, how can you lead a organization? It's based upon who you are. It's based upon your character. It's based upon your self-awareness and your self-management. Whereas a boss is more concerned about, let's just get things done. I don't care how it's done. Let's just do it. Share your leadership philosophy. Let people know who you are and let them know what your guiding principles are. Because when you know what your guiding principles are, they will follow not your vision, but they'll follow your character.
You look at leaders, you're assessing the situation, and I love the case study per se that we're developing here with the company that you're working with in your consulting. Take us to inside the walls. So you're inside the walls with this group. This leader here is acting as if he is the boss, which he is in essence by definition, but he's not leading. He's not making connections. He's creating what you're saying, a culture that is not healthy. How are you transforming his understanding, his basic understanding in the need for change, not changing him, but perhaps his behaviors, arming him with a leadership philosophy, a lot of introspection, a lot of self-awareness tools? How are you doing that? That's what I think the audience would love to hear.
I'm doing it through a 360, and it's very hard. That's why I spend so much time making sure that there's a psychological safety, that there's an agreed upon standard of non-attribution, that the senior leader understands that this is a listening, and the staff is that they know and they feel. There's a difference between knowing and feeling, that they understand that whatever they say is not going to be used against them. Sort of what I say,
Mhm.
used against you in a court of law. you know and the retribution, to make sure that there's none of that follow on. And and when there is, it's addressed. Now, one of the tools that I've used is a agreement. A perfect example of this one here in this case study is, one of the things that we're dealing with is talking about others and backbiting, okay, gossiping, okay. And one of the things that I've got that we're working on is, we have an agreement that nobody's talking about somebody else unless the person is there.
That's excellent
And
because that's
and
transparency at its best. What you're doing is you're getting people to understand why that behavior is harmful. And then you're giving them boundaries, per se, to go forward with a different way of
right,
approaching it.
right. It's more of, well, did you know that John, did this, or did you? Did I'm really having some problems with him because he's really doing this, or whatever. And unless that person's there, okay. And I also have it to where there's a couple of things that has to be said. It's like, is it true? Do you know? Is it something that's good? And is it something that the other person knows about? And if it doesn't meet that, I don't want to hear about it.
Right. What you're saying is they have had the conversation beforehand with the individual. Then you can have anything else after that. And if it's said, like you said, if it's said with kindness and with productivity and trying to get to the root of the issue or whatever the case may be, if it's said with kindness, and let's even bring in the word love, say it said with love, with an understanding of, we're here to help the cause, help each other. Listen, Dr. Campbell, let's be realistic about this. We spend way more time at our jobs than we do at home
At
or in
home,
our
that's right.
personal lives.
That's
The
right.
the ratio is unbelievable. Everybody knows this. The great resignation, the stats are everywhere. So to create an environment, and like you said with your research earlier in our conversation about the results of toxic behavior in companies and such, we have to work on these skills. We have to be better in the workplace. And what people, I think, fail to understand is, if you have and establish these connections, it will be better. There still will be gossip. There still will be toxic behavior. But if we can lessen it by learning and addressing it, and like you said, self awareness, at least as continuous learners, will make it better.
If you really break down leadership down to the basement, I call it, okay. If you really break it down to the foundation, It's all character. And if you're gossiping, that's a character issue. Accountability, that's a character issue. Integrity, some of these things, businesses spend billions of dollars teaching it, but people will not accept it until they're ready. I really firmly believe that no one changes unless they want to. I mean, you can beg them, you can train them, you can spend billions of dollars, you can do, reasons, emotions, tough love, all that. But there's only one thing that makes someone's change. They have to realize that they need to do it. And there is only one time that that will happen, and that is when they decide that they're ready to do it. And this leader is now understanding, he's like, if I want to keep my job, if I want to continue doing the things that I've been doing to serve, then it's not them, it's me. And a lot of times we blame others instead of looking at ourselves to do that. I'm I'm a good example. I did that for years. And leaders need to understand, or we need to understand, it's okay to admit that we don't have it all together.
Then that's the vulnerability part of it. You're absolutely right. And the strength in vulnerability is underrated as a skill, right? Were you able to say, I remember, being in meetings with the entire group that I was overseeing and saying, that's on me. That is on me. And that leaves them nowhere else to go. If it's on the leader, there's nowhere else to go, which means it's alleviating pressure and there's no blame to put. And then that would move us forward. Okay, it's his fault. Let's move on.
And the thing is that the leader doesn't need to be in a position. It's not a positional thing.
Sure.
Leadership is not a position. You oftentimes the most important person that has the most influence is the informal leader. It's where we need to make the relationships more important than the problem. And oftentimes we focus so much on problems and let's just get people back to work. I don't care. Let's just get it back to work. And we don't deal with the relationship. And when we do that, just getting people back to work and by at all costs and doing all that, that's where we get to be toxic. Is because I don't feel safe in order to come to you and say, you know what, boss, this really sucks. And it wasn't until when I was at The Hague doing my research, I had the privilege of having Nelson Mandela, his bodyguard, as my roommate for a month. And it was at that point that I, through lots of conversations, we still have conversations, lots of self-reflection, is to identify that it's okay to fail and it's okay to be vulnerable, to sit there and say, you know what, guys, I don't know what I'm doing. You're going to have to help me out. Or say, I'm having a bad day and I'm taking that on you and I don't mean to. That type of relationship. It's not a intimate relationship. It's not that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a collegial relationship that is a matter of understanding.
Dr. Campbell, which forms connection. And the more you can connect with your folks, the better everyone will perform. And again, you're inviting them in. If you're able to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm not having a good day today, I'm not feeling well, I made a monumental mistake on that analysis the other day. Thank you very much for picking me up. That brings them in. The people that are around you, that brings them in because they want to help. We're all human beings trying to do the best we can. The language that you're using is very useful and helpful to bring home that point, which is where you started this. The relationship is more important than the problem.
Yes. I wasn't always that way. I was a toxic leader at one point. I lacked the emotional control. And it took me getting down to where I almost lost everything before I figured out maybe it's not them, maybe it is me. And when I really took that to heart, people were telling me, but I wasn't listening. Sometimes you have to hear it over and over and over, and sooner or later it's going to click.
And when it
And
did
that's
click for you, how did your leadership
what.
life change and your life?
Well, when it clicked, I burnt so many bridges and so many, both personally and professionally, that I had to go back and really do some hard soul searching. That's when I really started doing a leadership philosophy that was mine instead of taking on other people what they thought that I should have. Then I did a lot of journaling, a lot of meditation, and I laughed when I was first taught how to do meditation. I was like, man, this is hokey. But there's a reason for it because our brains, you can change that neuroplasticity in your brain. You can change it. There is things that you can do to change the emotional makeup. One of the things I talk about leading self, leading others, and leading the community. And I use emotional intelligence to bridge that because we talk about it, but we don't talk about how to do it. I brought mindfulness and neuroscience and neural leadership into the self-awareness and the self regulation. And when I did that, that's when my process started to change. That's when my behaviors started to change. I'll still do a lot of reality checks. So I'll sit there and say, you know what? I get this sense that there's something wrong here. Are we okay? Because I really started to work on my communication. It's more of, you know what, when you do this, and I do this all the time, when you do this, I feel this, and I really don't like it.
This has been incredible. So thank you. Last question. Someone listening to this might be fearful that they're a toxic leader. All kidding aside, they might feel that, hey, I'm not connecting with folks. They're leaving the office dissatisfied. I'm running into issues. I've had a ton of success. I'm a CEO. I'm a president, but something's not clicking right here. What is the singular piece of advice they can do today to better themselves, to be continuous learners, and perhaps, as you said, change the neuroscience and the way that they're thinking about leadership?
The first thing I would say is define your character. Leadership is a privilege given by followers, and leaders don't have a right to be followed. You really don't. People will believe in your vision, but they'll follow your character. And the reason why we have toxic leaders is because of it's a character issue. I firmly believe it is a character issue. The failure of one's character can happen to anyone, but we are in charge of our character. Nobody else is. Nobody's in charge of our character except us.
Dr. Campbell, you were outstanding, and I thank you. This was tremendously insightful. Thank you very much. And we thank Dr. Campbell very much for being on the show. I have two takeaways from this conversation. Number one, the self-reflection that Dr. Campbell did because he was a toxic leader. He admitted it himself. So instead of continuing that way, he decided to self-reflect and then meditate, journal, and be more mindful of his approach as a leader. Now he's asking questions of his team. Hey, how are we doing? That was his process. Number two, we are only one person, not one person at work and one person at home. Dr. Campbell said we are not neurologically capable of distinguishing a separation. So it behooves us to go back to the beginning and create a personal leadership philosophy. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, I am Chris Gargano. We will see you next week, everybody, on Keep the Line Moving. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal, have a great week, everybody.